Welcome back to Revenge Room. If you're new here, this is where we share real stories of betrayal, patience, and the quiet kind of justice that hits harder than any scream ever could. Today's story is called My Daughter-in-Law. Hid an envelope under my truck's dashboard thinking I'd miss it. I moved it. Now let me tell you something. I've shared a lot of stories on this channel, but this one made me stop and read it twice, because it's not just about money or fraud or family drama. It's about a man who everyone underestimated because of his age. His own son stayed silent while his wife slowly built a trap designed to destroy him. His daughter-in-law smiled at him every Sunday dinner while forging his signature on documents he'd never seen. She thought he was old. She thought he was slow. She thought he wouldn't notice a single envelope hidden in the shadows of his own truck. But here's what she didn't know. He noticed everything. He just chose to wait. And what happened 23 minutes after he quietly moved that envelope to her glove box changed everything. But that's only the beginning. Because buried in this story is a secret his late wife tried to tell him before she died. A friend who spent 3 years watching from the shadows, and a son who wasn't just weak, he was being blackmailed. There are twists in this story you will not see coming, and by the end you will understand why sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's patient. So stay with me, because this story will take you through betrayal, heartbreak, and the kind of justice that only comes to those who know how to wait. Let's begin. My name is Douglas Reed. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 41 years as a machinist before retiring with a pension. I earned one calloused hand at a time. I raised a son, buried a wife, and learned long ago that the world doesn't owe you explanations. You have to find them yourself. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed, the kind of crisp, quiet morning that makes you think nothing bad could possibly happen. I was underneath my truck checking the brake lines like I do every few months. Old habits from decades of working with machinery. You don't wait for something to break. You find the weakness before it finds you. That's when my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. An envelope wedged deep under the dashboard panel, tucked into a spot where no reasonable person would ever look. Except I'm not a reasonable person. I'm a careful one. I slid out from under the truck and sat there in my driveway holding this envelope like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. It wasn't sealed. Whoever hid it there hadn't expected anyone to find it. Inside was a credit card statement. The name at the top was mine, Douglas Reed. But the address wasn't my house. It was a P.O. box I'd never heard of in a town 15 miles away. And the balance due was $12,418. $12,000 for purchases I never made, at stores I've never visited, on a card I never applied for. My hands didn't shake. I want you to understand that. I've been through enough in my life to know that panic is a luxury you can't afford when someone is trying to destroy you. So I sat there, and I breathed, and I started calculating. This envelope was hidden in my truck. My truck, which I drive maybe 3 times a week. My truck, which sits in my driveway where anyone in my household could access it. My son Lucas and his wife Vanessa live with me. Have for almost 2 years now, ever since they said they needed to save money for a house of their own. I welcomed them in. I thought it would be nice to have family close, especially after losing Margaret. My wife passed 3 years ago, cancer. The kind that gives you just enough time to say goodbye, but not enough time to say everything you needed to say. I still haven't sorted through all her belongings. Her clothes are still in the closet. Her books are still on the shelf. Sometimes I walk past her things and I swear I can still smell her perfume. I think about her every single day. Lately, her best friend Helen Whitmore has been visiting more often. Helen is 74, sharp as a tack, and she always asks me these careful little questions. How are you really doing, Douglas? Is everything all right at home? Are Lucas and Vanessa treating you well? I thought she was just being a concerned friend. Now I'm starting to wonder if she saw something I missed. I looked at that credit card statement for a long time. I thought about confronting Vanessa right then and there. I thought about calling Lucas and demanding answers. But here's what 41 years of precision work taught me. You don't make a move until you understand the full machine. You don't pull one lever until you know what every other lever is connected to. So instead of confronting anyone, I did something else. I walked over to Vanessa's car, which was parked right next to mine. I opened her glove compartment, and I placed the envelope inside. Then I went back into the house, poured myself a cup of coffee, and waited. I wanted to see what would happen when she found it. I wanted to see how she'd react when she discovered that her hiding spot had been compromised. Would she panic? Would she confess? Would she come up with some elaborate lie? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. Vanessa left the house around 11 that morning. She said she was going to run errands. I watched her pull out of the driveway, and I watched her disappear down the street, and I sat there in my living room with my cold coffee and my racing thoughts. 23 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed behind her car. I saw those lights from my living room window. I had been sitting there pretending to read the newspaper, but really I was watching the street, waiting. When the police cruiser appeared at the end of the block with Vanessa's car pulled over to the side, something cold settled in my chest. Not fear, something closer to confirmation. I grabbed my jacket and walked down the street, not rushing. A man my age rushing toward a traffic stop looked suspicious, but a concerned father-in-law taking a casual stroll to check on family. That's just good manners. By the time I got there, Officer Nathan Brooks was standing at Vanessa's window. Young guy, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of calm professional demeanor that comes from handling 1,000 routine stops. He was asking for her license and registration. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But Vanessa's reaction was anything but standard. She was sweating. In October, with the windows down and a cool breeze blowing through, her hands were trembling so badly she could barely get her license out of her wallet, and she was talking. God, she was talking so much. "Officer, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I rolled through that stop sign. I was distracted. I've had so much on my mind lately. You know how it is, family stress. Nothing serious? Just the usual things. I promise I'm usually such a careful driver." She was over-explaining. Every sentence had 3 more sentences attached to it. I've seen guilty people in my life. I worked in factories for 4 decades. I've seen men try to explain away safety violations, theft shortcuts that nearly got people killed. They all talk the same way. Too many words, too much detail, like they're trying to bury the truth under an avalanche of noise. Lucas was there too. He must have been in the passenger seat because now he was standing on the sidewalk watching the whole thing unfold. My son, 42 years old, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man I walked down the aisle at his wedding. He was pale, not just nervous. Pale like he'd seen something terrible, pale like he was waiting for the axe to fall. Officer Brooks asked Vanessa to step out of the vehicle. "Routine," he said. "Just need to take a look around." She complied, still talking, still explaining, still filling every silence with words that meant nothing. And that's when the officer found the envelope. He picked it up from the glove compartment, glanced at it, and asked what it was. I watched Vanessa's face. I watched it cycle through about 6 different emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, fear, calculation, and then finally that smooth mask she wears so well. "Oh, that," she said, laughing like it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. "That's just junk mail." Someone else's junk mail, actually. I must have picked it up by mistake at the post office. You know how they have those community bins for misdelivered letters? I was going to return it. I just forgot it was in there. She laughed again. The officer looked at the envelope, looked at her, and apparently decided it wasn't worth pursuing. He wrote her a warning for the stop sign violation and told her to drive safe. That was it. No questions about why junk mail would make someone sweat through their blouse. No curiosity about why a simple traffic stop had turned this woman into a nervous wreck. He just got back in his cruiser and drove away. Vanessa turned to Lucas with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "See, no big deal, just a warning. Let's go home." But before she could move, Lucas looked at me, really looked at me, and he opened his mouth like he was about to say something. "Dad, That's as far as he got. Vanessa's head snapped toward him so fast I thought she might hurt her neck. The look she gave him wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was a warning. A threat wrapped in a glance. Lucas closed his mouth. Whatever he was going to say, it died right there on that sidewalk. He looked down at his feet, shoved his hands in his pockets, and mumbled something about needing to get home. They drove away together. I walked back to my house alone. For the rest of the afternoon, Vanessa acted like nothing had happened. She made dinner. She laughed at something on television. She asked me if I wanted more coffee. Normal, pleasant, the perfect daughter-in-law. But I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's face, that moment when he almost spoke, the way Vanessa shut him down without saying a word. I've known my son his whole life. I know when he's scared, and right now he's terrified. But of what? That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Margaret's side of the bed was empty like it has been for 3 years. I used to reach over in my sleep expecting to find her there. I don't do that anymore. Now I just lie there and think. I started going back through the past 2 years, every moment, every conversation, every time something felt slightly wrong, and I dismissed it because I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. There was the time Vanessa offered to help me organize my financial paperwork. She said it would be easier if everything was in one place. I thought she was being helpful. Now I wonder what she was really looking for. There was the time I noticed Lucas flinch when Vanessa mentioned their future plans. Just a small flinch. barely noticeable. I told myself he was just stressed about money. Now I'm not so sure. There was the time Helen asked me very carefully if I ever felt like things in my house weren't quite right. I laughed it off, told her everything was fine. But Helen doesn't ask questions like that without a reason. The more I thought, the more I remembered. Small things, tiny moments. None of them meant anything on their own, but together they started forming a picture. A picture of something I didn't want to see. Someone in my house was stealing from me. Someone was forging my name. Someone was building a crime with my identity piece by piece while I sat there trusting them like a fool. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark counting every moment I had missed, every warning sign I had ignored, every time I chose to believe the best in people who didn't deserve it. And I made myself a promise. I was going to find out the truth, all of it, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning I did something I should have done years ago. I requested a full copy of my credit report. There are 3 major credit bureaus in this country, and I contacted all of them. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and waited for the results to come through on my computer. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name over the past 18 months. 3 cards I never applied for. 3 cards I never signed for. 3 cards that had been used to accumulate $47,000 in debt. $47,000. I read that number 5 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The charges were spread across dozens of transactions. Electronics, furniture, online purchases from retailers I'd never heard of, cash advances from ATMs in towns I hadn't visited in years. Someone had been living very well on my credit, and I was going to be the one left holding the bill. The billing address for all 3 cards was the same P.O. box I'd seen on that first statement, a post office box in a town 15 miles away. Someone had set up a shadow identity using my name, my social security number, my entire financial history. They'd been collecting statements at that P.O. box for a year and a half, making minimum payments just often enough to keep the accounts active, running up debt that would eventually come crashing down on my head. But the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the signatures. Each credit card application had a signature on file. I pulled up the images and stared at them for a long time. The signatures said Douglas Reed. The handwriting was close to mine, close enough to fool a bank employee glancing at a form. But it wasn't my handwriting. The loops on the D were wrong. The tail on the R was too short, little details that only I would notice. Someone had practiced my signature. Someone had studied how I write my own name and learned to copy it well enough to commit fraud. And I was pretty sure I knew who that someone was. I was still sitting at the table, trying to process all of this, when my phone rang. It was Lucas. "Dad," he said, and his voice cracked on that single syllable. "Dad, I need to talk to you." His voice sounded strange, thick with emotion, like he was fighting back tears. "I've made mistakes," he said, "in my marriage. I should have been stronger. I should have stood up for myself. For you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I sat there holding the phone, listening to my son apologize without really explaining what he was apologizing for. I assumed I knew. I assumed he was talking about Vanessa, about how she'd taken over their household, about how he'd let her make all the decisions, handle all the money, run their lives, while he stood by and said nothing. I thought he was apologizing for being weak, for letting his wife push him around, for failing to be the man I'd raised him to be. "It's okay," I said. "We'll figure this out." But even as I said it, something nagged at me. There was a weight in his voice that didn't match a simple apology for being spineless. There was fear there, real fear, like a man confessing something much darker than weakness. I didn't push him. I should have. Looking back, I should have demanded he tell me everything right then and there. But I was still reeling from what I'd found in my credit report, and I wasn't ready to have 2 difficult conversations at once, so I let him off the hook, and I went back to my investigation. I needed comparison signatures. I needed to prove that the signatures on those credit card applications weren't mine. So I started digging through old paperwork, tax returns, bank documents, anything that had my real signature on it. That's when I found the box. It was in the back of my closet, buried under old coats and forgotten shoes. A cardboard box filled with Margaret's belongings, things I hadn't been able to throw away after she died, things I hadn't been able to look at either. I pulled the box out and sat on the edge of my bed, just holding it for a moment. It had been 3 years since I'd opened this box. 3 years since I'd allowed myself to look at what was inside. But something was wrong. The box felt lighter than I remembered. I opened it and started going through the contents. Her reading glasses were there. A few pieces of costume jewelry she'd loved. Some photographs from our early years together. a scarf that still smelled faintly like her perfume. But things were missing. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what at first. It was more of a feeling, an absence, like walking into a room and knowing something has been moved even if you can't say what. Then I remembered. Margaret had kept a small jewelry case in this box, nothing expensive, sentimental pieces mostly, a brooch her mother had given her, a bracelet I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary, a locket with pictures of Lucas as a baby. The jewelry case was gone. I dug through the entire box twice, thinking maybe I'd just missed it, but it wasn't there. Neither were some of the photographs I remembered, pictures from our wedding, pictures from family vacations, gone. Someone had been through this box. Someone had taken things that belonged to my dead wife. I sat there on the edge of my bed, surrounded by what remained of Margaret's possessions, and felt something cold settle into my bones. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about credit cards and forged signatures. Someone in my house had violated my wife's memory. Someone had stolen from a dead woman who couldn't defend herself. I put the box back in the closet and walked out to the living room. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming to herself while she made lunch. Lucas was on the couch staring at his phone, avoiding my eyes. They looked so normal, so innocent. But I knew better now. They weren't just stealing from me. They were building a crime with my name on it. That night, I went back to Margaret's box. I couldn't sleep anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those forged signatures. I saw Vanessa's sweating face during the traffic stop. I saw Lucas's mouth opening and closing, the words dying before they could escape. So I got out of bed at 2 a.m. and pulled that cardboard box out of the closet again. This time I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for evidence. Margaret had always been the organized one in our marriage. She kept copies of everything. Tax returns, bank statements, insurance policies. If anyone had old documents with my genuine signature on them, it would be her. I started going through the box more carefully, setting aside the photographs and personal items, looking for the manila folders I knew she used to keep. That's when I found the envelope. It was tucked between 2 old birthday cards, almost invisible if you weren't looking carefully. A plain white envelope, unsealed, with no name or address on the outside. I almost set it aside, almost dismissed it as nothing important, but something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. I unfolded it and recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. That familiar script I'd seen on grocery lists and love notes and anniversary cards for over 40 years. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. My hands started trembling as I began to read. "My dearest Douglas," it began. "I'm writing this because I don't have the strength to say it out loud. The cancer has taken so much from me. My energy, my appetite, my ability to do the things I used to do without thinking, but it hasn't taken my eyes, and I've been watching. I've been watching Vanessa." I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I kept reading. I know this might sound like the paranoid ramblings of a dying woman. I pray that's all it is. I pray I'm wrong about everything, but I need to tell you what I've seen just in case. Vanessa asks questions, Douglas. Careful questions. About our savings, about your pension, about the house and who it will go to when we're gone. She asks them sweetly, like she's just making conversation, but there's something underneath. Something calculating. I've watched her with Lucas. She's isolated him from you slowly, so gradually you might not have noticed. Remember when he used to come over every Sunday just to have coffee with you? When's the last time he did that without Vanessa by his side? When's the last time you had a real conversation with your son, just the two of you, and the sweetness? Oh, the sweetness bothers me most of all. It feels performed, like she's playing a role, like she studied what a good daughter-in-law is supposed to look and sound like, and she's hitting every mark perfectly, too perfectly. I stopped reading. I had to. My vision was blurring, and I realized I was crying. I hadn't cried since Margaret's funeral. I thought I'd used up all my tears that day. I was wrong. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to continue. I might be wrong, Douglas. I hope I am. I hope Vanessa is exactly what she appears to be, and I hope you never have to read this letter at all. But if something happens after I'm gone, if you ever start to feel like something isn't right, please protect yourself. And talk to Helen. Helen Whitmore, my dearest friend. She sees what I see. We've talked about it late at night when you were asleep. She's promised to keep watching after I'm gone. Trust her, Douglas. If you can't trust your own instincts, trust hers. There was one more paragraph. It nearly broke me. Take care of our keepsakes, the things that matter to us, the jewelry my mother left me, the photographs from our wedding, the locket with Lucas's baby pictures. They're just things I know. But there are things, our history. Don't let anyone take them from you. I love you. I've loved you since I was 23 years old, and I'll love you until the last star burns out. Whatever happens, remember that. Always, Margaret. I sat there holding that letter for a long time. I don't know how long. The house was silent around me. Everyone else was asleep, and I was alone with my dead wife's voice warning me about a danger she saw coming 3 years before I opened my eyes. She knew. Margaret knew. She watched Vanessa asking her careful questions, watched her pulling Lucas away from his father, watched that performance of sweetness that never quite reached her eyes, and she tried to warn me. But she ran out of time. The cancer took her 2 weeks after she wrote this letter. 2 weeks. She probably meant to give it to me herself, or maybe she was waiting until she was sure, until she had proof, until she could say the words out loud without sounding like a jealous mother-in-law. But the cancer didn't wait. It took her before she could speak. So she left me this letter hidden in a box I couldn't bear to open, waiting for me to find it, waiting 3 years for me to finally see what she saw, and the keepsakes, and our keepsakes, the jewelry from her mother, the wedding photographs, the locket with Lucas's baby pictures. She told me to protect them, but they were already gone. Someone had already taken them. Someone had gone through my dead wife's belongings and stolen the pieces of our history that mattered most. Now I knew what happened to those missing items, and I knew who took them. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I talked to Margaret, not out loud, but in my heart where she still lives. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for not seeing what she saw. Sorry for taking so long to find her warning. Sorry for letting someone violate her memory while I sat there trusting people who didn't deserve it. And I promised her something. I promised I would do exactly what she asked. I would protect myself, and I would talk to Helen. Margaret had tried to warn me. I just found her voice 3 years too late. I drove to Helen's house the next morning. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give myself time to change my mind. The letter was in my jacket pocket, folded carefully, burning a hole through the fabric and into my chest. Helen Whitmore lives in a small cottage on the other side of town, the same house she's lived in for 30 years. She and Margaret met in a quilting circle back when they were both young mothers, and they stayed friends through everything. Marriages and divorces, births and deaths, the slow accumulation of years that turned strangers into family. When Margaret was sick, Helen was there every day. She brought soup and sat by the bed and held my wife's hand when I couldn't be there. She was at the funeral. She was at the house afterward, cleaning up while I sat in a daze, and she's been visiting me regularly ever since, asking those careful questions I never understood until now. Helen answered the door in her bathrobe, her silver hair pinned back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She took one look at my face and stepped aside to let me in. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just led me to her kitchen table and put on a pot of coffee. I sat down and pulled the letter from my pocket. I didn't say anything. I just handed it to her. Helen unfolded it slowly, and I watched her eyes move across Margaret's handwriting. I watched her face change as she read. And then I saw the tears. They came quietly, sliding down her weathered cheeks, dripping onto the paper she held in her trembling hands. But here's the thing. She wasn't crying from surprise. There was no shock in her expression, no confusion, just relief, pure, overwhelming relief. "I've been waiting for you to find that," she said quietly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting for 3 years. I stared at her. "What do you mean you've been waiting?" Helen set the letter down on the table and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she looked at me, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Exhaustion. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "Margaret made me promise," she said. 2 days before she died. I was sitting with her in the hospital, holding her hand, and she made me swear. She could barely speak by then. The cancer had spread to her lungs. Every word cost her something, but she made me promise anyway. I felt my throat tighten. Promise what? Helen took a shaky breath. She knew she was out of time, Douglas. She knew she wouldn't be able to protect you herself. And she didn't want to burden you with accusations while you were watching her die. She thought it would be cruel. She thought you had enough to deal with. So she asked me to be her eyes and ears. She asked me to watch over you after she was gone, to keep an eye on Vanessa, to make sure you were safe, and if I ever saw something wrong, to find a way to warn you. I thought about all those visits, all those careful questions, all those times Helen asked how things were going at home, whether Lucas and Vanessa were treating me well, whether I ever felt like something wasn't quite right. She wasn't just being a concerned friend. She was doing exactly what Margaret asked her to do. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. My voice came out harsher than I intended. "If you knew something was wrong, why did you wait 3 years?" Helen flinched, and I immediately regretted my tone. Because I didn't have proof, she said. I had suspicions. I had instincts. But Margaret made me promise not to make accusations without evidence. She was afraid that if I came to you with nothing but feelings, you'd think I was a meddling old woman trying to cause trouble. She wanted you to see the truth for yourself. She knew you'd believe your own eyes more than anyone else's words. I sat back in my chair absorbing this. Margaret had planned for everything, even from her deathbed. She had known she couldn't protect me herself, so she had recruited Helen to do it for her. She had left me a letter as backup. She had tried to warn me in every way she could think of without ever actually saying the words out loud. And I had spent 3 years completely oblivious. Helen reached across the table and took my hand. There's something else, she said. Something I've been tracking ever since Vanessa came into your family. I've never heard her mention her parents. Not once. In all the years she's been married to Lucas, she has never talked about her mother or father. No phone calls on holidays. No visits. No photographs in her wallet or on her phone. Nothing. I frowned. Maybe they're estranged. Maybe something happened. Helen nodded slowly. That's what I thought at first. So about a year ago I asked her. Very casually. I said something about how the holidays must be hard without family nearby, and I asked if her parents were still living. She changed the subject immediately. Didn't just deflect. She shut down. Her whole face went cold, and she steered the conversation somewhere else so fast it made my head spin. And she's never let me get close to that topic again. What are you saying? Helen squeezed my hand. I'm saying that a person who cuts off their own blood usually has a reason, and the reason is usually not a good one. People don't just walk away from their families for nothing. Something happened, something bad enough that she erased them from her life completely, and I think we need to find out what that something was. I looked down at Margaret's letter still sitting on the table between us. My wife's handwriting, my wife's warning, my wife's final attempt to protect me from something she saw coming years before I opened my eyes. I had failed her once. I had missed every sign she tried to show me. I had ignored the letter she left behind for 3 long years, while someone in my own house stole from me and violated her memory. I would not fail her again. I looked at Helen and made a decision. We need help, I said. Professional help. Someone who knows how to investigate this kind of thing. Someone who can help me understand what I'm dealing with and how to fight back. Helen nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. I know someone. A lawyer. He specializes in cases like this. Elder fraud, financial abuse. He's helped other people in situations just like yours. She wrote down a name and a phone number on a slip of paper and slid it across the table to me. Aaron Feldman, she said. Tell him Helen Whitmore sent you. Tell him everything. I took the paper and put it in my pocket right next to Margaret's letter. Then I stood up and hugged Helen for a long time. Thank you, I said, for keeping your promise, for watching over me, for being her friend until the very end. Helen hugged me back and I felt her tears soaking into my shirt. I made a promise, she whispered. And I always keep my promises. I drove home with Margaret's letter in one pocket and Aaron Feldman's phone number in the other. That evening, after Vanessa and Lucas had gone to bed, I sat in my living room in the dark and made a phone call I never thought I'd need to make. Aaron Feldman's office was on the 3rd floor of a modest brick building downtown, sandwiched between an accountant and a real estate agency. Not the kind of flashy law firm you see in movies with marble floors and leather chairs. This was a working attorney's office. Practical, no nonsense. I liked it immediately. Aaron himself was about 55, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from spending decades listening to people's worst problems. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit across from his cluttered desk. Helen Whitmore speaks very highly of you, he said. She called ahead and gave me the broad strokes, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. So I told him everything. The envelope under my dashboard, the traffic stop, Vanessa's disproportionate panic, the credit report showing $47,000 in debt I never authorized, the forged signatures that looked almost but not quite like my handwriting, the P.O. box where all the statements had been sent for 18 months, and finally Margaret's letter, the warning from my dying wife that I'd found 3 years too late. Aaron listened without interrupting. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching steadily across the paper. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he sighed. Mr. Reed, I appreciate you coming to me with this. I can see you've done your homework, and I can see this is causing you tremendous pain. But I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure I can help. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? Aaron spread his hands. Let me paint you a picture of how this looks from the outside. You're a 68-year-old widower. Your son and daughter-in-law live with you. You come to a lawyer claiming your daughter-in-law is committing fraud against you. What do you think a judge is going to see? I didn't answer. I knew where this was going. They're going to see family drama. Aaron continued. They're going to see an aging father who doesn't get along with his daughter-in-law. They're going to wonder if maybe you're confused about your own finances. They're going to ask why you didn't notice $47,000 in debt accumulating for 18 months. And Vanessa's attorney, assuming she gets one, is going to paint you as a bitter old man trying to destroy his son's marriage. I felt my jaw tighten. So you're saying there's nothing I can do? I'm saying that if you pursue this the wrong way, you'll lose. And you won't just lose the case, you'll lose your son. Lucas will have to choose between his wife and his father. And based on what you've told me about how controlled he seems to be, I think we both know which way that choice will go. I sat there in silence, absorbing his words. He was right. I knew he was right. If I went charging in with accusations and lawyers and police reports, Vanessa would turn Lucas against me. She'd paint me as the villain, and I'd spend whatever years I have left completely alone, estranged from my only child while she walked away free. But I hadn't come here to give up. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Inside were printouts of my credit reports, copies of the fraudulent credit card applications with the forged signatures, samples of my real signature from old tax returns and bank documents, and Margaret's letter carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. I pushed the folder across the desk. Before you make your final decision, I said I'd like you to look at this. Aaron raised an eyebrow but took the folder. He opened it and began examining the contents. I watched his face as he compared the forged signatures to my real ones. I watched his expression shift as he read through the credit card statements, noting the unfamiliar P.O. box. The purchases I couldn't have made, the systematic pattern of fraud stretching back 18 months. And I watched his eyes widen as he read Margaret's letter. When he finished, he set the folder down and looked at me with completely different eyes. This isn't family drama, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It isn't. Aaron picked up the credit card applications again, studying the signatures more closely. Identity theft, he said almost to himself. Fraud. And given your age and the fact that she's living in your home with access to your personal information, this could potentially qualify as elder financial abuse. These are federal crimes, Mr. Reed. Serious federal crimes. He set down the papers and met my gaze. I owe you an apology. When Helen called, I assumed this would be another case of family disagreements blown out of proportion. I get a lot of those. But this is different. This is real. So you'll help me. Aaron nodded slowly. I'll help you, but I need you to understand something. This is going to take time. We can't rush this. If we move too fast, if we tip our hand before we have irrefutable evidence, Vanessa will have time to cover her tracks. She'll destroy documents. She'll move money. She'll coach Lucas on what to say. And we'll lose everything. What do you need me to do? Aaron held up one finger. First, you need to be patient. I know that's hard. I know you want justice now. But patience is going to be your greatest weapon. He held up a second finger. Second, you cannot confront Vanessa directly. Not yet. You need to act normal. Pretend nothing has changed. Let her think she's getting away with it. The more confident she becomes, the more careless she'll get. And the more careless she gets, the more evidence she'll leave behind. And third. Aaron said we need to find out about Vanessa's parents. You mentioned that she never talks about them. No phone calls, no visits, no photographs. People don't disappear from their own families without a reason. And in my experience, when someone has completely erased their past, it's because there's something in that past they're running from. I'll make some inquiries, see if I can track down any information about her background. If she's done this before, there might be a paper trail. I stood up and shook Aaron's hand. Thank you, I said, for listening, for believing me. Aaron's grip was firm. Don't thank me yet. We have a long road ahead, and I need you to understand the stakes. If you rush this, if you lose your patience and confront her before we're ready, you'll lose everything, the case, the money, and your son. He looked me straight in the eye and his voice was deadly serious. If you rush this, he warned, you'll lose everything, including your son. 2 days after my meeting with Aaron Feldman, Helen called and asked me to come to her house. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before, a kind of quiet urgency that made me grab my keys immediately. When I arrived, she was waiting for me at the door. She looked different somehow. More alert, more focused, like a woman who had been holding her breath for 3 years and was finally ready to exhale. Come with me, she said. There's something I need to show you. She led me to her dining room where a thick manila folder sat in the center of the table. It must have been 3 inches thick, bulging with papers and photographs and handwritten notes. Helen gestured for me to sit down, then pushed the folder toward me. "I've been waiting to give you this," she said. "I've been waiting for the right moment." I opened the folder and felt my breath catch in my throat. The first page was a handwritten log dated almost 3 years ago, just 2 weeks after Margaret's funeral. The entry described a conversation Helen had overheard between Vanessa and Lucas in my kitchen. Vanessa was asking about my pension, how much it was, when I would start drawing from my retirement accounts, whether I had a will. I flipped to the next page, another log entry dated a month later. This one documented a shopping trip Helen had taken with Vanessa, during which Vanessa had purchased an expensive handbag and paid with a credit card Helen didn't recognize. When Helen commented on it, Vanessa had laughed and said it was just a store card, nothing special. But Helen had noticed the name on the card. It wasn't Vanessa's name, it was mine. Page after page, entry after entry, nearly 3 years of meticulous documentation, dates and times and locations, overheard conversations transcribed word for word, photographs of receipts that Vanessa had thrown away, retrieved from trash cans and smoothed flat for the camera, notes about spending patterns, about lies that didn't quite add up, about the slow and systematic way Vanessa had inserted herself into every aspect of my financial life. I looked up at Helen, stunned. "You've been doing this the whole time." She nodded, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride. "The whole time. Since the day we buried Margaret. I promised her I would watch over you, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a detective. I'm just a 74-year-old woman with too much time on her hands and a promise to keep. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I watched, and I wrote everything down." I shook my head in disbelief. "How did you get all this without anyone noticing?" Helen smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. Something I had never seen before. "Because no one notices me, Douglas. I'm 74 years old. I'm a widow with gray hair and reading glasses and a closet full of cardigans. When I show up at your house, people look right through me. They think I'm just a harmless old woman making small talk, asking questions about recipes and grandchildren and the weather. They don't realize I'm listening. They don't realize I'm watching. They don't realize I remember every single word they say." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Invisible people see everything, Douglas, and I have been invisible for 3 years." I turned back to the folder, flipping through more pages. There were photographs I didn't recognize, receipts from stores I'd never visited, credit card statements that must have been retrieved from the mail before I ever saw them. Helen had been running a one-woman surveillance operation right under everyone's noses, and no one had suspected a thing. Then I reached a section near the back of the folder and I stopped. It was labeled Family Background in Helen's careful handwriting. Inside were notes from various conversations Helen had documented over the years. Conversations about Vanessa's past, or rather conversations about the complete absence of Vanessa's past. There were no parents at the wedding, Helen said, watching me read. I noticed it at the time but didn't think much of it. Lots of people have complicated family situations. But then I started paying attention. In 3 years, I have never heard Vanessa mention her mother or father. Not once. No phone calls on holidays. No birthday cards in the mail. No photographs anywhere in your house. It's like she appeared out of thin air at age 30 with no history at all. I thought about it. She was right. I had been so focused on welcoming Vanessa into our family that I had never stopped to wonder about the family she came from. I just assumed she was a private person. I assumed some things were too painful to talk about. I never pushed. I found something else, Helen continued. About 1.5 years ago, I asked Lucas about his in-laws. Very casually, I said something about how it must be hard for Vanessa to be so far from her parents during the holidays. Do you know what he said? I shook my head. He said her parents disowned her, for some reason. He didn't know why. He said she doesn't talk about it, and he learned early in their relationship not to ask. Helen's eyes met mine, and I saw the same suspicion there that was now forming in my own mind. People don't get disowned for nothing, Douglas. Families don't erase their own children without a very good reason. Something happened. Something bad enough that her own parents cut her out of their lives completely. And I think whatever she did to them, she's doing to you now. I closed the folder and sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of what Helen had given me was almost too much to process. 3 years of evidence, 3 years of watching and waiting and documenting, 3 years of a 74-year-old woman keeping a promise to her dying best friend. Margaret knew, I said quietly. She knew something was wrong, and she knew she wouldn't be around to protect me, so she asked you to do it for her. Helen reached across the table and took my hand. She loved you more than anything in this world, And she knew that Vanessa was dangerous long before anyone else saw it. She couldn't prove it. She didn't have time. But she saw it. And she made me promise to keep watching until you could see it too. I looked down at the folder, at the thousands of hours of work it represented, at the devotion and determination of a woman society had taught everyone to overlook. And I understood something I should have realized a long time ago. I wasn't building a case alone. Margaret had been building it through Helen all along. I waited 3 days for the right opportunity. 3 days of watching Vanessa's schedule, noting when she left the house and how long she stayed away. 3 days of pretending everything was normal while my mind churned with everything Helen had shown me. On Thursday morning, Vanessa announced she was meeting a friend for lunch and would be gone most of the afternoon. I watched her car disappear down the street and waited another 10 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back for something she forgot. Then I found Lucas in the garage pretending to organize tools he never used. He looked up when I walked in and I saw it immediately. The fear, the guilt, the desperate hope that I was there for some innocent reason. "We need to talk," I said. I closed the garage door behind me. Lucas set down the wrench he'd been holding and wiped his hands on his jeans. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a man buying time. "Sure, Dad. What's on your mind?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. My son, 42 years old, the boy I taught to throw a baseball, the teenager I helped with his college applications, the man who stood beside me at Margaret's funeral and promised to always be there for me. "When did we stop talking?" I asked. I mean, really talking. Just the two of us, like we used to. Lucas's face flickered with something that might have been pain. "I don't know, Dad. Things got complicated. Life got busy. You know how it is." "No," I said. "I don't think I do, because the Lucas I raised would never have let 18 months go by without noticing that something was very wrong in his own house." The color drained from his face. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the credit report. The 3 fraudulent accounts, the $47,000 in debt, the forged signatures that looked almost, but not quite like mine. I watched his expression as he scrolled through the information. I watched his hands start to tremble. And I watched the moment when he realized he couldn't pretend anymore. Lucas sank onto a workbench, his head dropping into his hands. For a long moment he didn't say anything. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. And then finally, the words came. "I knew, Dad." His voice was barely a whisper. "I knew what she was doing to you. I've known for months." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not surprise. I had suspected as much after that phone call, after his cryptic apology about making mistakes in his marriage. But hearing him say it out loud, confirming that my own son had watched me be robbed and said nothing that was different, that was a wound I wasn't prepared for. "How long?" I asked. My voice came out harder than I intended. "How long have you known?" Lucas looked up at me and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Since last spring." She got careless, left some paperwork out. I confronted her about it and she just laughed, said you were old and wouldn't notice anyway, said by the time anyone figured it out it wouldn't matter, and you didn't think to warn me, you didn't think to tell your own father that his daughter-in-law was stealing his identity. Lucas's face crumpled. I wanted to. God. Dad, I wanted to so badly, but I couldn't. She has something on me. Something I did years ago, and she's been holding it over my head ever since. I stared at him, trying to understand. What could possibly be bad enough to make you watch your own father be destroyed? Lucas took a shaky breath. Then he told me. 8 years ago, he said I was driving home from a work party. I'd had too much to drink, way too much. I should have called a cab. I should have asked someone for a ride. But I thought I was fine. I thought I could make it. I wasn't fine. He paused, and I saw the memory playing out behind his eyes, the horror of it still fresh after all these years. I hit another car. It was a minor collision, just a fender bender, really, but I panicked. I was drunk. I was terrified of what would happen if the police came. So I drove away. I left the scene. I went home and I never told anyone. I felt sick. My son, a hit-and-run driver, a man who fled from his own mistake and let someone else deal with the consequences. How did Vanessa find out? She found an old repair receipt, Lucas said, from when I got my car fixed afterward. She asked questions, did research, found the police report from the other driver, and then she confronted me. She told me she had enough evidence to destroy my life if she ever wanted to. My career, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. She's been holding it over me ever since. I understood now, the fear I'd seen in Lucas's eyes. The way he flinched whenever Vanessa was nearby, the cryptic apology about making mistakes in his marriage. He wasn't just weak, he was trapped, a prisoner in his own home controlled by a woman who had turned his worst moment into a weapon. But understanding didn't mean forgiveness. You chose silence to protect yourself, I said quietly. But who was protecting me? Lucas broke down completely then, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I know I should have said something. I know I should have found a way, but every time I tried, I thought about everything I'd lose, my job, my freedom, everything I'd worked for, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't throw my whole life away. I stood there watching my son cry, and I felt something I never expected to feel. Pity. Not for the man he was now, but for the man he could have been if he'd made different choices. If he'd had the courage to face his mistakes instead of running from them. There's one more thing, Lucas said, wiping his face with his sleeve. Mom's things. The stuff from her box. I know you noticed some things were missing. I nodded slowly. The jewelry case, the photographs, the locket. Vanessa took them, Lucas whispered. She said she was cleaning up for you, getting rid of clutter. I should have stopped her. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't. I was too scared. I couldn't even protect my own mother's memory. I looked at my son for a long time. This broken man, who had once been my greatest pride. This coward who had let fear dictate every choice he made for 8 years. I didn't have words for what I felt. Anger, disappointment, grief for the relationship we used to have. But mostly I felt tired, bone tired from carrying the weight of betrayals I was still only beginning to understand. I turned and walked out of the garage without another word. There was nothing left to say. The deepest betrayal wasn't the fraud. It wasn't the money, or the forged signatures, or even the stolen keepsakes from my dead wife's memory. The deepest betrayal was the years of silence from my own son. After my conversation with Lucas, I spent 2 days in my room barely coming out. Vanessa probably thought I was sulking about something. Maybe she thought Lucas had finally told me about some minor disagreement and I was processing it. She had no idea what I actually knew, and I intended to keep it that way. On the 3rd day, I called Aaron Feldman and told him everything. About Lucas's drunk driving accident 8 years ago, about the blackmail, about how Vanessa had been using my son's worst mistake to keep him silent while she systematically dismantled my financial life. Aaron listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed the entire direction of my strategy. We can use this, he said, not the blackmail itself, but her confidence. She thinks she has complete control over your household. She thinks Lucas will never turn on her, and she thinks you're just a confused old man who hasn't noticed anything. Let her keep thinking that. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you give her exactly what she expects to see. An old man who's finally breaking down, someone tired and overwhelmed and grateful for help. The more helpless you appear, the bolder she'll become, and the bolder she becomes, the more mistakes she'll make. I understood immediately. Vanessa had been playing a role for years, the caring daughter-in-law, the helpful member of the family. Now it was my turn to play a role. The defeated old man, the easy target, the victim who never saw it coming. It was the hardest performance of my life. I started small, forgetting where I put my reading glasses even though they were right on my head, asking Vanessa to repeat things because I couldn't quite remember what she'd said, leaving bills unpaid on my desk looking confused when she pointed them out. I shuffled a little more when I walked. I sighed heavily when I sat down. I stared at nothing, sometimes letting my eyes go unfocused like a man whose mind was somewhere far away. Vanessa noticed immediately. She started watching me with a different kind of attention, not concern exactly, something more calculating, like a predator sensing weakness in its prey. She began offering to help with things I'd always handled myself. My checkbook, my insurance paperwork, the household bills that had been my responsibility since Margaret died. Each time I accepted gratefully. I thanked her for being so thoughtful. I told her I didn't know what I would do without her, and every time I saw that little smile play at the corners of her mouth, I knew the performance was working. 3 weeks into this charade, Vanessa made her move. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table one evening, her face arranged in an expression of gentle concern. Douglas, she said, I've been thinking. You have so much on your plate. The house, the bills, all the financial stuff. It must be exhausting. I nodded, slowly playing my part. It is, I admitted. I'm not as sharp as I used to be. Margaret always handled so much of this. Without her, I feel lost sometimes. Vanessa reached across the table and patted my hand. That's completely understandable, and that's why I think we should talk about getting you some help. She pulled out a document and slid it toward me. I recognized it immediately. A limited power of attorney form. This would let me handle some of the day-to-day financial tasks for you, she explained. Nothing major, just paying bills, managing accounts, making sure nothing falls through the cracks. It would take so much pressure off your shoulders. I picked up the document and pretended to study it carefully, even though I'd already seen a copy. Aaron had prepared me for this moment. He'd told me exactly what to do. I looked up at Vanessa with what I hoped was an expression of profound gratitude. You would do that for me? She smiled warmly. Of course. Your family. I signed the document. My hand trembled slightly as I did it, though not from fear. From the effort of maintaining the illusion. From the knowledge of what was really happening beneath the surface. What Vanessa didn't know was that Aaron had already restructured my entire financial life. The power of attorney she now held covered only 3 minor accounts, none of them containing more than a few $1,000s. Fraud alerts had been placed on every financial institution where I had any relationship, and 70% of my real assets had been quietly transferred into an irrevocable trust that Vanessa could never touch no matter how many documents she convinced me to sign. She thought she'd won. I could see it in her eyes as she tucked the signed POA into her purse, the triumphant gleam of a woman who believed she'd finally gotten everything she wanted. The old man had surrendered. The game was over. She had no idea the game was just beginning. Over the following weeks, I watched Vanessa's confidence grow. She stopped being careful. She started spending more openly, flashing new jewelry and expensive clothes. She made phone calls in the house without lowering her voice, discussing credit applications and account transfers like it was the most natural thing in the world. She even started looking at real estate listings for houses far more expensive than anything she and Lucas could afford on their own. Every single move was being documented. Helen continued her quiet surveillance, adding new entries to her folder almost daily. Aaron's investigator was tracking the fraudulent accounts, noting every transaction, building a timeline of criminal activity that grew longer with each passing day. And the fraud alerts were doing their job. Every time Vanessa tried to access something beyond the minor accounts I'd surrendered, the financial institutions flagged it and sent reports directly to Aaron's office. She didn't know it yet, but she was leaving a trail of evidence so clear that even the most skeptical prosecutor would have no choice but to take action. I continued playing my role. The tired old man, the grateful father-in-law, the easy victim who never suspected a thing. I let Vanessa help me with my checkbook. I thanked her when she suggested consolidating my accounts. I nodded along when she talked about how much easier everything would be once she was fully managing my affairs. And every night I lay in bed and thought about Margaret, about her letter, about her warning that I'd found too late. I'm doing what you asked, I told her silently. I'm protecting myself. I'm letting the evidence build. I'm waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, I'm going to make sure Vanessa never hurts anyone else again. Everything was moving exactly as I expected. Vanessa was building her own trap. Aaron called me on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after Vanessa signed the power of attorney. His voice had a different quality than usual, heavier, like a man who had found something he wished he hadn't. I need you to come to my office, he said. There's something you need to see. I drove downtown with a knot in my stomach. I had been expecting updates on the fraud investigation, maybe news about the financial alerts we'd planted. What I wasn't expecting was the folder Aaron pushed across his desk when I sat down. We found Vanessa's parents, he said quietly. I opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and a typed summary of an investigation that must have taken weeks. Birth records, marriage certificates, court filings. And at the very top, a photograph of an elderly woman with tired eyes and gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked broken, like someone who had survived something terrible and never fully recovered. Her name is Dorothy Aaron, continued. Dorothy Marsden. She's 73 years old. She lives alone in a small apartment in Ohio. Her husband passed away 4 years ago, and 12 years ago, before Vanessa ever met your son, Dorothy and her husband were the victims of a fraud scheme that cost them everything they had. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of fraud scheme? Aaron leaned back in his chair. The same kind. Exactly the same kind. Vanessa was 27 years old. She was still living with her parents, helping them manage their finances after her father had a minor stroke. They trusted her completely. She was their daughter. Why wouldn't they trust her? He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Over the course of 18 months, Vanessa forged their signatures on loan documents. She opened credit cards in their names. She drained their savings accounts. She took out a second mortgage on their home without their knowledge. By the time they realized what was happening, she had stolen approximately $120,000. I stared at the folder, unable to speak. $120,000 from her own parents, the same playbook she was running on me. Why didn't they press charges? Aaron shook his head slowly. Shame, embarrassment, the devastating realization that their own daughter had betrayed them. Dorothy told me they couldn't bear the thought of their friends and neighbors knowing what had happened. So they paid off the debts as best they could, sold their home to cover the rest, and simply erased Vanessa from their lives. They never spoke to her again. I thought about all those years Vanessa had been part of my family. All those dinners and holidays and casual conversations. All those times she smiled and laughed and played the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. And the whole time she was carrying this history, this pattern, this predatory instinct that had already destroyed one family before she ever set her sights on mine. Dorothy agreed to talk to me. Aaron continued. It took some convincing. She's spent 12 years trying to forget what happened. But when I explained that Vanessa was doing the same thing to another family, she broke down. She said she's carried guilt all these years for not pressing charges. She said if she had done something back then, maybe Vanessa would have been stopped. Maybe no one else would have been hurt. Will she testify? Aaron nodded. If it comes to trial, yes. She said she lost her daughter to whatever darkness lives inside her a long time ago. She said she won't let Vanessa destroy another family if she can help it. I closed the folder and sat in silence for a long moment. Everything I thought I knew about Vanessa had been wrong. She wasn't a daughter-in-law who went bad. She wasn't someone corrupted by greed or opportunity. She was a predator. A serial predator who targeted families, earned their trust, and systematically extracted everything of value before moving on to the next victim. I wasn't special to her. I was never special. I was just the next mark on a list that probably wouldn't end with me. There's more, Aaron said. He pulled out another stack of papers. The financial alerts we planted are starting to trigger. Over the past 2 weeks, Vanessa has attempted to access accounts beyond the ones covered by the POA you signed. She's tried to open new credit lines using your information. She's made inquiries about your retirement accounts and pension. Every single attempt has been flagged and documented. The banks are cooperating fully. We have timestamps, transaction records, and in some cases recorded phone calls where she impersonated you to try to gain access. The trap we set is working. She's walking right into it. I looked at the evidence spread across Aaron's desk. The pattern from 12 years ago, the testimony from a mother who lost her daughter to darkness, the fresh documentation of new crimes being committed in real time. The walls were closing in. Vanessa thought she was special. She thought she was smarter than everyone around her. She thought she could keep running the same con, indefinitely moving from family to family, leaving destruction in her wake. She didn't realize she was just repeating the same crime with a different family. The call came 4 days later. I was sitting in my living room pretending to read the newspaper when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Mr. Reed, this is Officer Nathan Brooks. We met a few weeks ago during a traffic stop involving your daughter-in-law. I remembered him, the young officer with the calm demeanor who had pulled Vanessa over that day. The one who had watched her sweat and stammer over what she claimed was junk mail. I remember I said, "What can I do for you, officer?" There was a pause on the line. "Actually, Mr. Reed, I'm calling because there's something I need to do for you. We've received multiple identity theft reports from several financial institutions. Your name appears on all of them, and the evidence we've gathered points to someone in your household." I let the silence stretch for a moment, playing my role one last time. "That's very concerning," I said carefully. "What happens now? We need to bring your daughter-in-law in for formal questioning," Officer Brooks replied, "and we'd like you to come down to the station as well. There are some things we need to discuss." They arrested Vanessa that evening. I watched from my living room window as 2 officers walked her to their cruiser. She wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but her face had lost all its usual composure. She looked around wildly, searching for something, someone, any explanation for what was happening. Her eyes found mine through the window. I held her gaze for just a moment, then I turned away. At the station, they put Vanessa in an interrogation room. I wasn't allowed to observe directly, but Aaron had connections, and he gave me a full account afterward. She tried everything. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about her aging father-in-law who had become so forgetful lately. She suggested that Douglas, meaning me, had probably authorized all those accounts and simply didn't remember. She implied that perhaps I was experiencing early dementia and had confused myself about my own financial decisions. She was good. I'll give her that. She had perfected this performance over years of practice. But this time the audience wasn't buying it. The investigators had Helen's folder. 3 years of meticulous documentation, dates and times and photographs and overheard conversations, a pattern of behavior so clear and consistent that no amount of charm could explain it away. They had Aaron's financial forensics, transaction records showing exactly when and where the fraudulent accounts had been opened, signature analysis proving the forgeries, phone recordings of Vanessa impersonating me to gain access to accounts she had no right to touch, and they had Dorothy Marsden, Vanessa's own mother. A sworn statement describing how her daughter had done exactly the same thing 12 years ago. The same manipulation, the same forged documents, the same systematic theft from people who trusted her completely. When the investigators presented this evidence, Vanessa's composure finally cracked. According to Aaron, she went pale. Her hands started shaking, and for the first time in her life, she had no clever words to make the problem disappear. Lucas was questioned separately. I asked Aaron to let me know what happened in that room, and he obliged. They told Lucas everything. The full scope of Vanessa's crimes, the previous fraud against her own parents, the mountain of evidence that had been building for months. And then they gave him a choice. He could tell the truth and cooperate fully, or he could maintain his silence and become an accessory after the fact. They explained something else, too. The statute of limitations on his drunk driving accident had expired years ago. Whatever Vanessa had been holding over his head, it was toothless now. She couldn't hurt him with it anymore. The only thing that could hurt Lucas now was a lie told today. For the first time in 8 years, my son had to decide who he really was. A man controlled by fear, or a man ready to face the truth. According to the investigators, Lucas sat in silence for almost 5 minutes. Then he started talking. He told them everything, the fraud he had witnessed, the blackmail that had kept him silent, the stolen items from his mother's belongings, the conversations he had overheard, and the documents he had seen Vanessa hide. By the time he finished, the investigators had more than enough to proceed with charges. They brought Vanessa back into the interrogation room and told her that her husband had cooperated fully. They showed her the evidence from her own mother. They laid out the timeline of her crimes against me, matched almost perfectly to the crimes she had committed 12 years before. And they watched her realize that there was no escape, no charm offensive that could save her. No manipulation that could make this disappear. Aaron told me later that the moment of realization was almost physical. Vanessa's shoulders dropped. Her face went blank. The mask she had worn for so long simply fell away, leaving nothing but the hollow emptiness of a woman who had finally been caught. She finally understood something that had never occurred to her before. Douglas was never the victim. He was the one holding the strings. Aaron arranged the meeting. He said it wasn't strictly necessary from a legal standpoint, but he understood that some things couldn't be resolved in courtrooms. Some things needed to happen face-to-face, in a room with no lawyers and no officers. Just the people whose lives had been tangled together by lies and silence and betrayal. We met at Aaron's office on a gray Thursday afternoon. Vanessa sat on one side of the conference table. Lucas sat beside her, though he had pulled his chair slightly away, creating a gap between them that spoke louder than words. I sat across from them both and waited. Vanessa looked different than I had ever seen her. The polish was gone. The careful makeup, the styled hair, the confident posture that had always made her seem larger than she was. Now she looked smaller, diminished, like a balloon slowly losing air. But there was still defiance in her eyes. Even now, facing federal charges and the collapse of everything she had built, she wasn't ready to surrender completely. You have to understand, she said, breaking the silence first. Everything I did was for this family's future, for Lucas, for our future children. You have all this money just sitting there, Douglas. You weren't using it. You weren't planning anything with it. You were just going to let it waste away while you sat in that house alone, waiting to die. I said nothing. I just watched her, letting her words hang in the air. Someone had to think about the future, she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she settled into her justification. Someone had to make sure this family had security. You would have wasted it all on nothing. At least I had a plan. At least I was building something. I let the silence stretch for a long moment after she finished. Then I spoke and my voice came out colder than I expected. You didn't want a family, Vanessa. You wanted assets, and you used my son's fear to get them. She flinched as if I had struck her. That's not fair. I love Lucas. Everything I did for us. No. I shook my head slowly. Everything you did for yourself. Just like you did to your own parents 12 years ago. Just like you'll do to the next family if anyone is ever foolish enough to trust you again. The mention of her parents hit her hard. I saw the shock in her eyes, the realization that I knew about Dorothy, about the $120,000, about the pattern that stretched back more than a decade. For a moment she seemed to have no response. Then her expression changed. The desperation faded, replaced by something harder, something vicious. If she was going down, she was going to take someone with her. She turned to Lucas and her voice dripped with poison. "Tell him, Lucas. Tell your father what kind of man you really are. Tell him about that night 8 years ago. The accident you caused, the car you hit, the scene you fled because you were too drunk and too scared to face what you'd done." Lucas went pale. His hands gripped the edge of the table. "You want to sit there and judge me?" Vanessa continued, her eyes locked on her husband. "But you're no better than I am. You've been hiding your own crime for 8 years. You've been letting me carry that secret, letting me protect you from the consequences. If I go down, you're coming with me." She sat back triumphant, waiting for Lucas to crumble, waiting for him to beg her to stay silent, waiting for the fear that had controlled him for nearly a decade to do its work one more time. But something had changed in my son. I could see it in the way he held himself, the way his jaw tightened, the way he looked at Vanessa not with fear but with something that almost resembled pity. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then Lucas spoke and his voice was steadier than I had heard it in years. "Do it. Tell everyone. I already told the police everything. The accident, the cover-up, all of it. The statute of limitations expired years ago. There's nothing you can hold over me anymore." Vanessa's face went white. "What? I'm done," Lucas said. He stood up slowly, pushing his chair back from the table. "I'm done being your prisoner. I'm done being afraid of my own mistakes. I'm done letting you use my worst moment to control my entire life." He looked at me then and I saw tears forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For the silence. For the betrayal. For not being the man you raised me to be. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm done hiding." I looked at my son standing there with his shoulders squared and his eyes clear for the first time in years. It didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't undo the years of silence while Vanessa picked me apart piece by piece. But it was something. A beginning. A first step on a very long road. I stood up without saying anything to Vanessa. There was nothing left to say. She would face the legal system now. She would answer for her crimes. And whatever happened to her from this point forward was no longer my concern. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back at Lucas one final time. "We have a lot to talk about," I said, "but not today." Lucas nodded, his face wet with tears. "I know, Dad. I know." I walked out without looking back. The battle was over. Now came the harder part, learning to live with the victory. The trial took place 4 months later. 4 months of depositions and evidence reviews and legal motions that blurred together into a haze of paperwork and waiting rooms. Aaron guided me through every step, explaining what would happen and what I needed to do. But even with his steady presence, those months felt like walking through fog. Vanessa was formally charged with 3 federal counts: identity theft, financial fraud, elder financial abuse. Each charge carried its own weight, its own potential consequences. Together, they painted a picture of systematic predation that even the most sympathetic jury couldn't ignore. The prosecution presented its case methodically. First came the financial evidence. The 3 credit cards opened in my name. The $47,000 in debt I had never authorized. The P.O. box registered under a false name where all the statements had been sent, the forged signatures analyzed by handwriting experts who testified with certainty that I had not written them. Then came Helen's documentation. 3 years of meticulous observation presented in chronological order, dates and times and photographs and transcribed conversations, a pattern of behavior so clear and consistent that it removed any possibility of coincidence or misunderstanding. When Helen took the stand, she spoke with quiet dignity about the promise she had made to her dying friend, about the years she had spent watching and waiting, about the invisible woman who had seen everything because no one thought to notice her. But the most devastating testimony came from Dorothy Marsden, Vanessa's own mother. She traveled from Ohio to sit in that courtroom and describe what her daughter had done to her 12 years ago. The manipulation, the forged documents, the $120,000 stolen from parents who had trusted their child completely. Dorothy wept on the stand. She said she had spent years blaming herself, wondering what she had done wrong as a mother. She said the guilt of not pressing charges had haunted her every day since. And she said that when she learned Vanessa was doing the same thing to another family, she knew she had to speak up. She couldn't let her silence enable another destruction. Vanessa's defense tried everything. They suggested I was confused, forgetful, perhaps suffering from early cognitive decline. They implied that the evidence had been fabricated, that Helen was a meddling old woman with a grudge, that Dorothy was an estranged mother seeking revenge on a daughter who had cut her off. None of it worked. The evidence was too strong. The pattern was too clear. And when the jury delivered their verdict, it was unanimous on all 3 counts. Guilty. The judge sentenced Vanessa to 6 years in federal prison. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for everything she had stolen, though Aaron told me privately that I would probably never see most of that money. People like Vanessa rarely have real assets. They spend what they take and move on to the next victim. I watched her face when the sentence was read. I expected anger. Maybe tears, perhaps. One final attempt at manipulation. Instead, I saw nothing. Just blankness. Emptiness. Like a mask that had finally cracked to reveal there was nothing underneath. Lucas kept his word about the hit-and-run confession. He went to the police voluntarily and told them everything. The accident 8 years ago, the panic, the decision to flee instead of face the consequences. As Aaron had predicted, the statute of limitations had long expired. There was nothing the law could do to him now, but there were other consequences. The confession became public record. People talked. Lucas's employer quietly suggested he might be happier somewhere else. Several professional opportunities that had seemed promising suddenly evaporated. His reputation, carefully built over 2 decades, suffered damage that might never fully heal. Lucas accepted it all without complaint. He told me it was the price of his freedom. After 8 years of living under Vanessa's control, 8 years of silence and fear and self-loathing, he said the relief of finally telling the truth was worth whatever it cost him. He filed for divorce 3 weeks after Vanessa's sentencing. The proceedings were quick and uncontested. There was nothing left to fight over. The community learned about the case in pieces, news articles with carefully worded headlines, whispered conversations at the grocery store and the post office and the church where Margaret and I had been married 43 years ago. Some people thought I was cruel. I heard the whispers. An old man prosecuting his own daughter-in-law, breaking up his son's marriage, airing family business in public courtrooms for everyone to see. Couldn't he have handled it privately? Couldn't he have shown some mercy? But more people understood, especially the ones who had watched their own elderly parents be exploited by family members or caretakers or strangers who saw vulnerability and smelled opportunity. They stopped me in parking lots and coffee shops. They shook my hand and thanked me for standing up. They told me about their own mothers and fathers who had been too afraid or too confused or too ashamed to fight back. I became in some small way a symbol of something, an old man who refused to be a victim, who gathered evidence and built a case and waited patiently for justice instead of surrendering to despair. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated, proud, relieved that it was finally over. Instead, I felt tired, bone tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. And beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. A strange emptiness, a hollow space where my family used to be. I had won. But winning had cost me my son's marriage, my trust in the people closest to me, and 3 years of my life spent building a case against someone who had sat at my dinner table and called me Dad. Justice had arrived. But I felt no triumph. Only the weight of what my family had become. 8 months passed. Spring turned to summer. Summer faded into fall, and somewhere along the way I started to feel like myself again, not the same self I had been before all of this. That man was gone forever, buried under the weight of betrayal in courtrooms and the hollow victory of watching justice served. But a new version, older, quieter, more careful about who I trusted. I sold the house in September. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every room held too many memories, too many ghosts. Margaret in the kitchen humming while she cooked. Lucas as a teenager sprawled on the couch watching football. Vanessa smiling her perfect smile while she calculated how much she could steal. I needed a fresh start, somewhere with no history, somewhere I could breathe without choking on the past. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, a balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one had ever lied to me within these walls. No one had ever betrayed me in this kitchen. Every corner was clean, unmarked by the fingerprints of people who had wanted to destroy me. Helen helped me move. She showed up with boxes and packing tape and the same quiet determination that had sustained her through 3 years of secret surveillance. We had become genuine friends by then, bound not just by our shared promise to Margaret, but by something deeper. 2 people who had survived the same storm and come out the other side still standing. She visited regularly after I settled in. We would sit on my balcony with cups of tea and talk about everything and nothing. Books we were reading, places we had always wanted to visit, memories of Margaret that made us laugh instead of cry. Helen never pushed me to process what had happened faster than I was ready to. She just showed up, week after week, a steady presence in a world that had proven itself unsteady. I started writing in a journal, not about the fraud or the trial or the years of deception. I wrote about my life, about Margaret and our 40 years together, about Lucas as a child before everything went wrong, about the lessons I had learned and the mistakes I had made and the things I wished I had understood sooner. I wrote it all down as a record, for myself, for anyone who might someday face what I had faced, for whatever grandchildren might eventually exist so they would know who their grandfather really was. One evening in late October, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Helen always called before she came over, and I had no other regular visitors. I opened the door and found Lucas standing there. He looked different than the last time I had seen him. Thinner, older. The boyish softness in his face had hardened into something more angular, more weathered. He was holding a cardboard box clutched against his chest like something precious. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked past me into the living room and stood there awkwardly still holding the box, looking around at my new apartment like he was seeing a foreign country. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said finally. "I know I haven't earned that. I might never earn it. But there's something I needed to bring you." He set the box on my coffee table and stepped back. I looked at it for a long moment before opening the flaps. Inside were objects I had thought were lost forever. Margaret's jewelry case, the one that had disappeared from her belongings. Photographs from our wedding, from family vacations, from ordinary days that had seemed unremarkable at the time but now felt priceless. A pressed flower, brown and fragile, that Margaret had saved from her bridal bouquet 43 years ago. Letters I had written her during a summer when we were young and temporarily separated by work, and at the very bottom, a small leather journal I had never seen before. "She hid them," Lucas said quietly. "Vanessa, she took them from Mom's box after the funeral, said she was cleaning up, organizing things for you." I found them in a storage unit she had rented. I've been holding on to them since the trial, trying to work up the courage to bring them back. I picked up the journal with trembling hands. It was Margaret's handwriting on the first page, dated 18 months before she died. She had started keeping it when she first got sick. I read the entire journal that night, long after Lucas had gone. It wasn't about Vanessa or suspicions or warnings about the future. It was about us, about our life together, about the gratitude Margaret felt for every ordinary moment we had shared. She wrote about the way I made her coffee in the morning, about how safe she felt when I held her hand, about the sound of my laugh and the patience I showed when she was too sick to do the things she used to do. She wrote about her hopes for me after she was gone. She wanted me to find peace, to keep living, not just existing, to remember our love as a gift rather than a loss. The final entry was dated 3 days before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, but the words were clear. "Whatever happens, I know Douglas will find his way. He always does. He's the strongest man I've ever known, even when he doesn't believe it himself. I love you, my darling. I'll love you until the last star burns out." I closed the journal and held it against my chest, feeling her presence in the room for the first time since she died. Not a ghost, not a memory. Something warmer, something alive. Lucas called me the next day. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a chance to rebuild, a chance to prove that the man who had chosen silence for 8 years could become someone better. I told him the truth. He could call me, he could visit. But trust would have to be earned from zero, brick by brick, over months and years of consistent honesty. Nothing would ever be the same between us. We couldn't go back to what we were. But maybe with enough time and effort, we could build something new. That night, I sat on my balcony and watched the stars come out. I thought about Margaret's journal, about her faith in me, about the long road that still stretched ahead. I realized that peace wasn't a gift someone could give me. It was a choice I had to make every single day. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since I found that envelope hidden under my dashboard. 1 year since my world cracked open and revealed the rot that had been growing beneath the surface of my family. 1 year since I started down a path I never imagined, walking through betrayal in courtrooms and the slow, painful work of rebuilding a life from the wreckage. I sat on my balcony as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. The air had turned cool with the approach of evening, carrying the faint smell of autumn leaves and wood smoke from somewhere in the neighborhood. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and watched the colors shift and deepen, thinking about everything that had happened since that Tuesday morning when I reached under my truck and touched an envelope that didn't belong there. I had been a different man then. Not weaker exactly, but more trusting. More willing to believe that the people under my roof had my best interests at heart. I had spent 67 years assuming that family meant safety, that blood ties were stronger than greed, that the people who called me dad and father would never deliberately cause me harm. That man was gone now. In his place was someone older, wiser, more careful. Someone who had learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. That trust must be earned, not assumed. That love does not guarantee loyalty. That the people closest to you can also be the ones who hurt you most deeply. But here's what surprised me. I didn't feel bitter. I had expected bitterness. I had expected to spend my remaining years angry at the world, suspicious of everyone, hardened into cynicism by what I had endured. Instead, I felt something closer to peace. Not happiness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for happiness, but a quiet acceptance of what had happened and what I had done in response. I had fought back. That was the thing I kept coming back to. When I discovered the fraud, I could have crumbled. I could have confronted Vanessa in a rage and given her time to cover her tracks. I could have let the betrayal destroy me the way it was designed to do. Instead, I'd been patient. I'd gathered evidence. I'd built a case with the help of people who believed in me. And when the time came, I'd let the truth do what truth always does. I never raised my voice. I never broke the law. I never sought revenge for its own sake. I simply refused to be a victim and trusted that justice would eventually arrive. It had. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it had arrived. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I knew who it was before I answered. Helen had become as predictable as the sunset, showing up every Thursday evening with tea or cookies, or simply her presence. Tonight she carried a wrapped package under her arm, her eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. "I brought you something," she said, as she settled into the chair across from me on the balcony. "I've been holding on to it for a while, waiting for the right moment. This feels like the right moment." She handed me the package. It was lightweight, rectangular, wrapped in simple brown paper. I opened it carefully and felt my breath catch in my throat. It was a photograph of Margaret, not a formal portrait or a posed family picture, but a candid shot I had never seen before. She was laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled with joy. She looked young in the photo, maybe 35, full of life and light, and the kind of happiness that radiates from people who don't yet know what sorrows await them. Helen had found a beautiful frame for it. Dark wood, simple lines, elegant without being showy. The kind of frame Margaret would have chosen for herself. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Helen smiled softly. "I took it. Years ago at a barbecue you two hosted. She didn't know I was watching. I just captured the moment and kept it all these years. I thought you might want it now." I carried the photograph inside and placed it on my bookshelf next to Margaret's journal. For a long moment, I just stood there looking at her face. Her laughing, joyful, beautiful face. "I listened," I told her silently. "It took me 3 years to find your warning, but I listened, and I kept my promise. I protected myself, just like you asked." Helen stayed for another hour. We talked about small things, the weather, a book she was reading, a recipe she wanted to try, the ordinary conversations of two old friends who had survived extraordinary circumstances together. After she left, I sat down at my desk and opened my journal to a fresh page. I had been writing regularly for months now, documenting my thoughts and memories and the lessons I had learned. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an ending, or maybe a beginning. I picked up my pen and started to write. "This is for Lucas," I began. "For any grandchildren who might come someday. For anyone who might face what I faced and wonder if they have the strength to fight back." I wrote about the journey, about the envelope and the fraud and the years of careful evidence gathering, about Margaret's letter and Helen's surveillance and the devastating discovery of my son's complicity, about the trial and the verdict and the long months of rebuilding that followed. And then I wrote the words that had been forming in my mind for a year, waiting for the right moment to be set down on paper. They looked at me and saw an old man. They assumed I was slow, confused, easy to manipulate. They thought age had made me weak, that 68 years of living had dulled my senses and clouded my judgment. What they didn't understand is that 68 years of living teaches you things no young person can know. How to wait, how to watch, how to hold your tongue when every instinct screams for confrontation, how to let your enemies defeat themselves by giving them the rope to hang themselves. They underestimated me because of my age. That was their mistake. I set down my pen and read over what I had written. It felt true. It felt complete. It felt like the end of a story that had taken a year to tell. I walked back to the balcony and watched the last light fade from the sky. The stars were beginning to emerge, faint pinpricks of light in the darkening blue. Somewhere out there, Margaret was watching. I was sure of it. I had kept my promise to her, I had protected myself, and I had proved something that people too often forget. Age is not weakness, experience is not decline, and the quiet strength of a man who has lived 68 years should never, ever be underestimated. They thought I was old, they thought I was slow, they thought I wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight, wouldn't win. What they missed was 68 years of experience, and a wife who never stopped protecting me even from the other side. And that is the story of Douglas Reed, a man who refused to become a victim. You know, when I first read this story, what struck me most wasn't the fraud or the betrayal or even the courtroom victory. It was the patience. Douglas didn't scream. He didn't confront Vanessa in a rage that would have given her time to destroy evidence. He waited. He watched. He let the truth build until it was undeniable. And that takes a kind of strength most people never develop. So here's my advice if you ever find yourself in a situation like this. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your household, it probably is. Don't dismiss that feeling just because the person involved is family. Second, document everything. Dates, times, conversations, receipts. Write it down. Take photographs. Build a record before you need it, because once you confront someone, evidence has a way of disappearing. Third, get professional help. A lawyer who specializes in elder fraud or financial abuse can guide you through options you didn't know existed. And finally, don't let shame keep you silent. Vanessa's own parents never pressed charges because they were embarrassed. That silence allowed her to do the same thing to another family years later. Your voice might protect someone else. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stay strong out there. And remember, age is not weakness, it's wisdom. I'll see you in the next one.